The audacity of America in the process of starving the Cuban population right now. 11 million people living on this island no longer have any energy for the past 3 months. Their energy grid just collapsed today. The audacity for the guy responsible for that bloodshed to turn around and be like, it's the Cuban leadership that's violent, actually. Insane.
I think the second tool, of course, is we have, as the president mentioned, is we have law enforcement options. We know that some of this fraud is just bad. Some of it's criminal.
Okay,
we know
fuck this fucking fraud conversation. Yeah. CNN breaking news. The Cuban energy grid has completely collapsed. Has suffered a total collapse. This is according to the country's power operator. It's the first nationwide blackout since the U.S. effectively shut off the flow of oil to Cuba. And we're so cruel that it's on autopilot, chat. That's what's so fucked up about the way that America operates. Like, this is not even a part of the consideration. Like, what we're doing in Cuba on top of what we're doing in Iran is not even something that people are considering. I do believe I'll have the honor of taking Cuba, President Trump says. Yeah. Fucking rapist president, dude. He is literally raping the land. He is raping the people. Like, he is such a goddamn rapist. In a way, perfect for America, I guess.
And breaking news into CNN, Cuba's electrical grid has suffered a complete and total collapse. This is according to the country's power operator. It's the first nationwide blackout since the U.S. effectively shut off the flow of oil to Cuba.
David Adler says, we're laying siege to the island of Cuba, turning off the lights in homes, hospitals, and the country's most critical infrastructure. These are war crimes, lethal, cruel, and criminal acts of collective punishment. It is sociopathy dressed up as foreign policy. And it's so crazy. Like I said, I cannot explain to you how cruel this is and how banal it is treated as, how normal it is. We are like, this is a war crime that has been ongoing for the past 3 months now. Okay? And what blows my mind about it is that most Americans are completely oblivious to it. They don't even care about it. Because at least with like the Iran situation, there is a negative impact that they can actually experience at home. With the Cuba situation, nothing, right? Cuba has never been a threat to us. Cuba has never been a threat to anybody else. Cuba has, as a country, been just an overall moral force. I normally say countries don't operate on moral boundaries. Cuba is one country that is unique. One of the only morally righteous forces on this fucking planet, historically. It's incredible. It's hard to believe that there is any justice that will ever be served. How is Cuba morally good? I don't get how a state can have morality. I mean, it doesn't. But if it could, if states could behave as moral actors, Cuba would be one of the only states that you could see as a morally righteous state in its existence since the Cuban Revolution. This is the replacement for U.S. aid, by the way. That doesn't mean that the practice of U.S. aid was all good, but I still take that over hard power. No, for sure. Sending doctors on medical missions all around the world, even to the United States of America at times. On behalf of Cubans, no, you are wrong. Cuba is not a moral force, Lamau. Dude, if you do this fucking diasporoid shit in my chat one more fucking time, oh my God. Every conversation has to be met with the diasporoid freaks of every country that we are doing unlimited maximum punishment to. where someone has to come in and be like, you don't understand. You don't understand. I'm a Cuban. On behalf of all Cubans, shut the fuck up. You don't know how bad it is. You don't know how much like the government has mismanaged everything. I know it's the government's fault, right? What was the government dressing as? What was the government wearing when we decided to fucking rape it? That's the argument that you're making. Your standpoint epistemology doesn't stand here. I need to make that very clear. You cannot utilize standpoint epistemology to justify American intervention, endless, senseless, cruel American intervention that is a war crime, a crime against humanity. Collective punishment is a war crime. America has never stopped collectively punishing the Cuban population. Wake the fuck up. We just spent the last 3 weeks of Iranians living in the Western world demanding that America and Israel intervene in the affairs of Iran. And now a lot of those voices have become silent. The reason why is because some of them at least have the capacity to feel shame. They feel the shame of agitating. No, the U.S. is wrong for blocking oil and the Cuban regime is a brutal dictatorship. It's not. Shut the fuck up. No, it's not. No, the fuck it's not. Shut the fuck up. Oh my God. Adolf Hitler could be a cruel tyrant that engaged in some of the worst crimes against humanity in the Holocaust, but also the USSR wasn't so great either. America wasn't so great either. You're fucking insane. Actually, no, it's literally worse than that. The argument that you're presenting is even worse than that. The argument you're presenting is equivalent to saying some of the Jews actually did deserve to get killed in the fucking concentration camps. That's basically what you're saying when you make this comparison. Yeah, Adolf Hitler was a ruthless tyrant and a fucking fascist of the highest order that engaged in the mechanized death of 6 million Jews, but have you considered some of those Jews were like tax evading? Like that's literally what you're saying here. It's so ridiculous. Oh my God. What did this guy say? Gusanito Gordo? Why did the Miami Cubans vote for Trump? Doing this to their island, the home of Cuba? Wait, why did you ban this person? They're not asking like the bad question. It's because there's a lot of people that are living in the Western world that just straight up are fucking insane. Bro, people don't have food. What are you talking about? I have family there right now. Talk to them about how great Cuba is. Why the fuck don't they have food? I hate this dumb shit, dude. Yeah, it's because the Cuban, like, what do you think is going on? The Cuban government is like literally going, I hate my own population. I don't want to give them food. Is that what you think is going on? God damn, dude. Every fucking person. For the record, of course there are going to be people that are going to falsely present the equation while they're suffering, falsely assume that it's actually the fucking government itself that's like causing their demise, okay? Just like there are Americans who think banning transgender athletes from the NCAA competitions is going to make their lives better, okay? Like, think for a moment. Do you think the Cuban government is deliberately denying food to its own citizens? Do you think that's what's going on? This and the other conversation that's like always the top of mind is the antibiotics, like as though the Cuban government is like directly refusing to give medical aid to its own citizens on purpose. Why are they doing it? No one knows. There is never any fucking answer to this question. Okay? There's never an answer to this question. Why? Do you think that the Cuban government is deliberately starving its own citizens? Do you think that the Cuban government is deliberately refusing to render medical aid to its own citizens? Do you think that that is the case? How many instances of foreign intervention led by the United States of fucking America has been so devastating, and it always comes on the heels of arguments such as this one? Ridiculous. Yeah, Miami Cubans are reactionary. No, they have to ration because they can't grow food. The machinery is in tatters. I know. And then people assume that this is not like, you know what it's like? Yelling at the Cuban government about the food supply in this current situation is like yelling at the fucking doctor in the emergency room while they're engaging in triage. It's not the fucking doctor's fault, brother. What are you talking about? Like after like a mass shooting incident, you're mad at the doctors for engaging in triage rather than the fucking mass shooter, or rather than the government that allowed the mass shooter to have access to an arsenal of weapons that they can use on and deploy on a fucking civilian population at any given moment. It's ridiculous. Yeah. It's always the same too. Think, oh, Palestine looks the way it does because of Hamas, not because of Israel and America. Iran looks the way it does right now because of the IRGC, not because of Israel and America. Jesus Christ. It's just so strange. It's always never the fault of the American government, even when the American government openly admits that they're doing this. You're talking to me in a moment where the Trump administration is saying, I'm going to take Cuba. It's going to be mine. After 3 months of collapsing the energy grid deliberately, what do you think that has? What kind of impact does that have on the regular citizens of Cuba? Yeah, bombing Iran in the middle of negotiations, while starving Cuba, while genociding Palestinians, while threatening to invade Greenland. The U.S. and Israel are the single greatest threat to humanity. Is not even close. We're all forced to live in the nightmare they create. There is a better future out there. We don't have to do this, okay? We are American citizens. Ask yourself that. Do I like this? Is this beneficial for me? Do I want this to happen? What can I do to change it? That's the purpose of this fucking broadcast. That's why I do this every fucking day for 8 hours a day. And there are still motherfuckers who come in here and try to do this standpoint epistemology to be like, no, you don't understand. As a Cuban, I think it's totally fucked up what the American government's doing to Cuba. But also they kind of deserve it because the Cuban government was asking for it. Think. Oh. Why can't it be both? Why can't the government be terrible and the U.S. intervention worsen conditions? Because it's fucking bullshit. It's absolute bullshit. There are countries that have gone through unimaginable pain and struggle and have been able to completely rid themselves of American domination. And we see what those countries look like now. There are not many of them, but one country that you can give an example of is China, okay? A lot of these other countries would look like China if America did not consistently destroy them. Okay? That's the problem. And it certainly, not only does this argument not apply to Cuba in general, it does not apply to Cuba at all. Okay? Vietnam is another one as well, for sure. But the reason why I use China is because it's like completely sovereign. Not only does that argument not apply to Cuba at all, and every time I ask the questions to people who come in here with this argument, their answers are ridiculous, where it'll be like, well, the government actually arrests dissidents, right? It's like, yeah, they're under imperial siege. Of course they fucking have to keep things stable to the best of their goddamn ability so it doesn't fucking collapse entirely, okay? This is... like, it'd be great. It'd be great if that wasn't the fucking case. But you have to think, like, who is responsible for this? Is there a larger domineering force that is 90 miles off of its fucking coastline that literally owns a piece of Cuban territory? That's how much we dominate Cuba, that we give them $1 to rent out Guantanamo Bay from the Cuban government. They can't say anything about it. They can't do anything about it. People that come in here and say, why can't it be both, just don't realize that they are playing a role in crafting State Department narratives. They're playing a role in crafting propaganda. The fuck do you mean, why can't it be both? I'll give you another example. I already gave you the example of like yelling at the doctor for engaging in triage and not the mass shooter or the government that allowed the conditions for a mass shooting to take place once again. Another example would be like if someone came up to you, okay, you were a bully at school. Someone came up to you and shot you in the fucking head. Well, and then you go, well, you were a bully, so you deserve it. Is that how you would operate in that situation? Or would you be horrified by the crime of, you know, getting shot in the fucking head, having your friend get shot in the fucking head? Yes. How can you, in the process of like, we're not done. We're not done with, oh, well, we have to free the people of Iran and what that freedom looks like. We're not done with that story. It's happening right now, right? That bullshit is happening right now. And there are still people that go, yeah, but I'm going to do that exact same thing. I'm going to do that exact same thing, but this time for Cuba. And unlike Iran, you can't even say any of the things as far as like state repression or undemocratic principles of Cuba. You can't even fucking say that shit about Cuba. It's ridiculous. You guys are just oblivious to how things operate in Cuba. You hear from your parents or your distant relatives that live on the island who are suffering, who are probably mad at the Cuban government as well. Some of them are not going to understandably recognize exactly what is the reason. They're going to blame the government. It happens. Okay? But taking that as like God's honest truth without like doing a little bit of digging, trying to comprehend what has taken place historically in Cuba, why they're in the conditions, why they're facing the conditions that they're facing, is ridiculous. You're a goddamn adult. Do you think Bob, for example, the MAGA dad Bob, would be an accurate reflection of how things are operating in America right now? Do you think the average MAGA person, for example, would be able to give an accurate assessment of how the American government is operating currently? If you can comprehend that American citizens are not a monolith, why the fuck do you think that your relatives in Cuba would be able to completely capture the fucking abuse while they're literally experiencing it? And that is the reflection of like the overwhelming Cuban attitude. Okay? It's ridiculous. Every time there's like any sort of protest that take place in Cuba, which during blackouts there are angry people that decide it's the government's fault and not America that's fucking starving it. Okay? And then there are tens of thousands of people that fucking come out and take to the streets in opposition to that. Every single time in Cuba, every single time there is an anti-government protest that's like super limited. Okay, and people will say, oh, it's because the government is repressive. There are tens of thousands more people that take to the fucking streets. There are very proud and very resilient people, but you never see that. You never see that in the Western news. You don't hear that from your relatives. So you just think that's not the case. Do we care about democracy or do we not? People will say, oh, well, the Cuban government's a single party state. It's just a communist party. Okay, do you have any idea? Do you have any idea how the Cuban election system works? They have incredibly localized versions of democracy. Not only do they have referendums, but even though every single person technically is a part of the Communist Party, every single person is elected to the power, they have a hyper-localized system of elections. But you didn't know that. And you never cared, you never entertained it, you never cared to learn about it. So you just go off on whims. I just think it doesn't matter. Whatever wrongs you think the Cuban government has committed, it's not for those reasons that the United States wants to dominate Cuba. That's also the other side of the story as well. The Cuban government even acknowledges this stuff. During the recent protests, it was reported that the state newspaper that the protests were reasonably distressed by the current conditions. Yeah, the fucking president came out and apologized for it. He's like, it's completely outside of my control, but I totally understand why you guys are frustrated. We want to fix the situation, but America will not let us breathe. It's one of the craziest things because like Cuba has literally never, ever presented like a significant threat to the United States of America. Not even once. So why the fuck do you look at a situation of just rank cruelty, utterly unjustifiable cruelty, and seek out imperial narratives that give breathing room to the fucking arguments as to why there's sanctions to begin with. It's fucking ridiculous. The embargo placed upon Cuba since the Cuban Revolution was already unjustifiable. It was already cruel. It was cruel from its inception. It was cruel from the beginning. And now it is taken a totally new form, a complete siege, death and destruction that befalls the entirety of the Cuban population. And there are still people in this chat that try to tell me, well, my relatives in Cuba hate the government. Okay, I hate my government too, but that doesn't mean that I would be on board with every single fucking person in this country starving, children not being able to get the necessary surgeries in the hospitals because there's no energy in the country. The position that you are taking, you said Cuba was never a threat. What about the Cuban Missile Crisis? What about the Cuban Missile Crisis? Even the Cuban Missile Crisis and the way we talk about it here in the United States of America is so funny. Because the Cuban Missile Crisis, if we were being objective, would be called the Turkish Missile Crisis. We placed missile bases right on the ass cheeks of the USSR during the Cold War, and then the USSR responded by putting nukes in Cuba. But this was a wonderful thing that the USSR did because it allowed Cuba to remain sovereign as long as the USSR and that threat was there. USSR gave Cuba nuclear sovereignty. They weren't even Cuba's nukes, ironically enough. They were the USSR's nukes. Yeah, we were also threatening to invade Cuba before the crisis. That's the other side of it. Cuba, since the revolution, has always tried to work with the United States of America, just like Iran. Always tried to work with the West. Always tried to work with the United States of America. Always. From the inception, we just did not want an ideological... It wasn't even initially communist. The Cuban Revolution wasn't initially a communist revolution either. Like Fidel Castro was not a communist. If you look at the early analysis from the CIA, they say as much, where they're like, yeah, this guy's just like, he's a progressive, he's a leftist, he's a nationalist, he wants national emancipation. It makes sense. Now, Che Guevara, that's a different story. But Fidel Castro, he's not even like ideologically a communist. At times, the July 26 forces were sometimes at odds with the way that the Communist Party wanted to operate. Yes, Che Guevara is a communist. Fidel Castro initially was not. But it doesn't matter. Land reforms should not be met with the largest imperial superpower destroying your country, trying to destroy your economy, trying to strangle your country every step of the fucking way. It's ridiculous. Cuba is proof that even the most liberal-facing country basically operates like a major aid org internationally, can be painted as a villain. Exactly. Every single liberal interventionist argument falls apart when it comes to Cuba. You say, oh, well, they're homophobic. You can't say that about Cuba. Cuba is literally more woke than the United States of America. They had a constitutional referendum, I believe in 2019 or 2017, I think it was 2019, where the population came out and overwhelmingly voted to enshrine LGBTQ protections in the fucking Constitution by referendum. I believe 70% of the public voted to enshrine LGBTQ protections. Okay? Did you know that? No, you didn't, because you don't know anything. And you've never been curious about the countries that we fucking dominate. At best, if you have a little bit of curiosity, you look at a couple State Department written narratives and you go along with it. Cuba is proof that even the most liberal-facing country that basically operates like a major aid org internationally could be painted as a villain. You could be a democratic, pro-LGBTQ country and provide literally everything humanly possible to your population in terms of education and housing, and still the propaganda sticks for dumb fuck Americans. It's one of the most perverse, one of the most cruel things that we have done. This dumbass doesn't know what a liberal is. No, he's saying liberal in air quotes. He's saying like the liberal aesthetics, right? Of social liberalism, right? Like Cuba has it all. Cuba has that tenfold. The U.S. is trying to do what they did to Venezuela, but with Cuba, yes. But the problem with the Cuba side of things is that like they're willing to open up their markets. They're willing to privatize. They're willing to stop the pain, stop the bleeding. So it's not even like a full-blown ideological commitment to communism. Okay, they are. But the problem for Donald Trump is he doesn't just want that. He wants a trophy. Iran was willing to liberalize and open up their democracy, or open up their markets, democratize the markets as they call it. Okay? It doesn't matter. Iran is a little bit different because Iran is singularly in the hands of Israel. Whereas with Cuba, you can read the Cuban thing as like the Gusano Miami Cuban lobby, and also Marco Rubio and his ambitions. It's what I never understood. Cuba could be what Vietnam is. Also, the U.S. having open markets and good relations, yet we decided to keep the embargo. Vietnam is very far away. Okay? Vietnam is very, very far away. And also, we invaded and occupied Vietnam for 20 years. We did untold amounts of war crimes in Vietnam. Cuba had a successful revolution against the American proxy, the American puppet, and we never let that go. It was at the peak of the Cold War, too. It's pure Cold War boomerism. Trump violated HIPAA? What is this?
We had one man who was very, very ill. It looked like he wasn't going to make it. I don't know. I won't mention his name. Should I? Do other people know his name? Do you want to mention it? He'll be proud. Go ahead. Tell him the story.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. President. Congressman Neil Dunn of Florida had some real health challenges, and it was very serious, and had a pretty grim diagnosis. And I mentioned it to the president, and I said, Congressman Dunn is a real champion and a patriot because he's still coming to work. And if others got this diagnosis, they would be apt to go home and retire. And
what was the diagnosis?
It was, I think it was a terminal diagnosis.
He would be dead by June.
Okay, that wasn't public, but yeah, okay. That's
that was
so funny. Anyway, let's get back to fucking Iran.
27 years, no president was willing to do what I'm doing, and they should have done it a long time ago. It would have been a lot easier. There's no president that wanted to do it, and yet every president knew. I've spoken to a certain president, who I like, actually, a past president, former president. He said, I wish I did it. I wish I did, but they didn't do it. I'm doing it, yeah.
Which president?
I can't tell you that. I don't want to embarrass him. It would be very bad for his career, even though he's got no career left. Go ahead, please.
You mentioned.
How about the man right
Thank you, sir. Mr. President, you mentioned that you're not entirely sure who you're dealing with, who the leadership is in Iran. Do you see a viable opposition movement still in that country following all of the protests that we had seen before the airstrikes, and kind of an opposition movement that could become a viable leader in Iran?
Well, the biggest problem, and we have brave people in this room, but the biggest problem that I see is that, they put out a warning, and we have the warning. We get everything they get. And it said any protester that goes onto the street will be immediately shot and killed.
Yeah. Cuba could do Deng style reforms Which, by the way, I mean, even that's not good either, right? For America's interest, because like, look at China. Look at what a powerhouse China became. We don't like that. We don't want that, because the threat of a good promise comes into our backyard with Cuba. At least with China, it's far away. You can craft an Orientalist framework and say, well, they're Chinese, they're fucking weird, they're scary, whatever. But Cuba is literally 90 miles off the American coastline. Can you imagine a China-style governance 90 miles off of the American coastline? Motherfuckers would be taking the car boats from Miami to Cuba if that was the case. Americans already used to fly to Cuba for healthcare, and the conditions there are dire. Motherfuckers would be swimming to Cuba in shark-infested waters to go live there. So my point is, and you already are arriving at that conclusion here as well, Cuba could do Deng-style reforms. It seems that that's the direction they were inevitably going to go to, but there's a deep hatred and embarrassment among the defense establishment that Cuba could dare be defiant so close to our coastline. It's a Cold War embarrassment, that and the desire for South Florida votes. It's not even the desire for South Florida votes, because then it doesn't make sense why the Democrats would care. The Democrats would be totally aligned on this stuff, right? Because the Democrats lost the South Florida votes. The South Florida voters are unimaginably reactionary, let's say, the ones that do care about this shit. They're never going to vote for the Democrats anyway. The last time they did vote for a Democrat was unironically a Democrat that was opening up Cuba and normalizing relations with Cuba. His name was Barack Obama. He's the last Democrat that won the majority of Cuban voters. Yeah, Obama gave Cuba sanctions relief in exchange for opening up their markets. And that was a moment. That was a moment where there was unironically room to fucking breathe. Remember the Cuban journalist that I talked to, who I'll be hanging out with when I'm down there, that said that like there was room to develop, room to grow, room for prosperity in Cuba for once. And then Trump came in and destroyed it. Unfucking believable, dude.
This is a little tougher than the American way. This is not quite as tough as nobody can believe it. So I can't imagine. They don't have guns, and the other ones have.